Our subject this morning is an important one for several reasons. It's how to awaken spirituality in others. It's important because any time that we feel deeply about something, naturally we want to share it with our friends. It's important also for our children and for how to raise children in the best way. So, it's well for us to consider the subject. It's well for us to consider the disadvantages, the defects to this whole thing before we even begin. Why do we want to convert other people? Why do we want to help or inspire other people? Do we want to convert them, in fact? We see that there are a lot of people who are so insistent on getting other people to believe the way they do that they become offensive. You've probably been in airports where you've had people come up and try to buttonhole you and get you interested in something. I remember one time in my apartment in San Francisco, some people came and they seemed very friendly. They wanted to be good neighbors and asked if they could talk with me, and I said, well, sure, so I invited them in. Next thing I knew, I was being socked with a lecture about how if I didn't accept Jesus Christ as my only Savior, I would go to hell, and all these various things. And it seemed as if they had won entrance on false pretenses. Besides which, the egg on the stove was getting harder and harder, and there was nothing I could do about it. What I've observed is that people who are just gung-ho to convert people are really only projecting their own doubts. Once you're really sure of something, you don't really want to force it down other people's throats. You offer it. That's very different. What we're talking about here isn't trying to inspire other people and on the spiritual path and drag them to church even if we have to chloroform them. What we're trying to do is propose something that will inspire them to want to do it if they will, but in no way to interfere with their freedom. Now, why should we get into it in the first place? Well, first of all, it's human nature. Any time that you find something that you really like, unless you're an extraordinary selfish person, you're going to want to share it with other people. You find some new kind of gelato ice cream at Earth Song, and you want to tell everybody, don't you? After all, I've got to get behind this thing now. Now that Bill has made it clear to everybody they should bless me every time they have some. But it's so. I'm certainly that sort of person. I know that because I love skiing, everybody, all the men at Mount Washington would go skiing, and since I left Mount Washington, nobody goes skiing. But it's just the sort of thing that when you really like something, it's something of an instinct to want to share it with other people. It's a way of expanding your own enjoyment. That's one reason for trying to share with people anything that you really find good. Not forcing it down their throats, not trying to do good the way Archibald Mulliner did, going into Bottleton East and cramming bread down the mouth of this poor child who was hoping for candy, but rather just make it attractive to them because you want them to enjoy also, and if they don't want it, that's fine. You don't feel crushed, you don't become a limp pansy because of somebody saying, no, I don't think I like skiing, and I'm not going to go. But just because if they would like it, if they have the potential to, then you're sharing that enjoyment with others. This is so for anything that you like. But then why particularly inspire spirituality in others? Well, the answer to that is purely and simply that it's the only thing that works. That you reach the point of being pretty certain of that before you really come onto the path. And you become more and more certain of it as you get further and further along on the path. It's very interesting if you look back over history and observe the many things that mankind has found to get interested in. And you don't find unanimity in any field except this one. the people who want to conquer nations, the people who want to write great books and paint great paintings and reform society and all these different things, you find that those people who are in it, those people particularly who achieve success in their chosen fields, they're not agreed that this is the thing that people should do. They're not usually agreed that this is the best thing they could have done with their lives. Pardon me. Look again at science. How over the last 3 or 4 centuries, science has changed its mind drastically on its most basic doctrines. One hesitates to use the word dogma, and yet it really applies. They become dogmas. Think of the Darwinian thing. If there's one cornerstone of scientific accepted truth, it would have to be the theory of evolution, wouldn't it? Apart from outside of physics, let's say, but of biology and psychology and sociology and all of them, they all depend on this idea of Darwinian evolution. And now just the other day, a very famous astronomer, who isn't a biologist, but at least he's a reputable, very reputable scientist, is challenging the whole thing. He says the chances of its being true are so small as to approach 0. They're just not worth even considering. There are a lot of biologists who are starting to see the flaws, the fact that they can't discover these missing links that they're looking for, and so on and so on. Every decade it seems as if some new discovery is made that completely throws out the window most or much of what science used to believe. And this doesn't mean that science therefore always goes back to square one. It's advanced enormously, but it has not. In fact, more and more in this century, scientists have reached the point of saying that we're not trying to find truth. We're only trying to find things that work. Because it's absolutely impossible for them in the way that they're going to find ultimate verities. And yet as they go further and further in their field, at least more and more scientists are beginning to say that it looks very suspiciously as if the ultimate verity were God. As if this whole universe were a thought in the mind of its creator. Again and again you find them veering away from their materialistic approach, which they have to do anyway. It's been decades since they discovered that matter doesn't even exist except as energy, so that you can't really be a materialist when you reach that point. But science has more and more just gotten away from its basic premises, and more is starting to include these others, and yet it's constantly, for all its advances, it's constantly remained a shifting sand. And the same is true with other fields. I remember this one person who became a very great artist and then lost interest in art. He said, I got to the top and I saw there was nothing in it. It's fun for a while, but then after that, what? Look at Howard Hughes with all the money he had, and he wasn't happy. Again and again you find that no matter what the human field, there has never been unanimity. No one has ever said, this is it. Except in this one field of God, spiritual living. Everybody who has advanced on the spiritual path and had some kind of real inner contact, everyone they're completely unanimous in saying this is what it's all about. This is what we're here to find. St. Augustine said, Father, thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. This is something which there is no break in that unanimity. There's no contradiction to it. Consistently, down through the ages, consistently in every culture, in every country, in those countries where God is ignored. I have heard just recently that in Russia, which is a country dedicated to atheism, there is a tremendous yearning for spiritual realities. How far can you go in the direction of a mere political philosophy as the end-all of everything, and not finally just die for boredom, if nothing else? People want something to sort of have fun with. There's no fun in that. There's a lot of fun in meditation. There's a lot of fun in being in tune with the universe. There's a lot of fun in having this inner joy. And so it is that people, even in countries that don't support that kind of thing, there's this constant coming back again and again and again, sort of like Malvina Reynolds' song of God Bless the Grass. She was seeing this freeway had been poured, and then a crack appeared, and through the crack a little bit of grass came. And she was using that as an allegory to show how man may cover the country with technology, and yet somehow the spirit just keeps coming back. We can't kill it. It's always going to spring. With the least crack that it observes, that it discovers, it will spring back into manifestation again. Every culture, every age, every grade of society, people have tried to describe the things that make people religious as if it were something purely outward, a social phenomenon. They've thought maybe it's poor people who become religious, but no, you go to most of the ashrams and you find that it's well-to-do people who go to them. Well, why that? Again and again, you see, there's really no way of pinning it down to any particular class. Everybody, from all classes, you find this longing. In my background, just to give a single example, I was born into a family that went to church, that my mother was very religious, but there was no influence toward meditation and toward giving up materialism and all that. And yet I never wanted anything of what they had. Why? Karma. I'd had the experience of the other. Every one of you, we don't come here because we're destitute. People, everybody in this community has come from a well-to-do home because they, having had what they wanted, found it wasn't really what they wanted after all. But among the poor, there's also that. And some people say, well, it's their poverty, it gives them the incentive. No, they do it in spite of their poverty. So what it is that people find when they come onto the path is that which they've always been looking for and thought to find in things, but never did. They thought they would find it in wealth and in fame and in power and accomplishments and so on. Always there was just something left that didn't happen. And then, when they came on the path and found their own inner joy, then they discovered what they'd been looking for all that time. Now, inevitably, when you make this kind of discovery, it takes you into a different dimension. It's no longer just sharing the joy of skiing with friends who might like to break a leg with you, but there's something much deeper involved. This realization that no matter what they're doing, they're not going to find what they're really looking for unless they also take up meditation. There's a lot of incentive for trying to inspire people to come onto the path, for trying to bring up our children. I've seen a lot of parents say, no, they don't want to train their children spiritually to give them a religious education because they don't want to bias them. They want them to feel free to make their own choice when they grow up. Well, you don't make choices in a vacuum. You make choices when you have some basis for comparison. And so for the parents to give them nothing is the worst possible education. That's what our education is today. And I see these children striking out in anger against a system that gives them nothing to believe in, nothing to hope for. That which they are told to hope for seems so hopelessly sterile. A beautiful political system where there's no poverty. Well, I've never been poor, but that lack of poverty was not what made me happy. I looked around and I saw all the people in Scarsdale, New York, and all they could ever do was go to parties and see movies and plays, and it seemed like such a barren existence without something inside oneself. No, it's a very different dimension from skiing. It's a very different dimension from anything that you might feel a particular enthusiasm for. Worldly people will take it as just that. They'll think, well, we don't want you converting me, which we don't want to do either. They'll think, well, what's different? I mean, so you get your kicks in church or meditating, and I get mine going to art exhibits. And who's to say which is better? At least I'm in touch with great minds, and you seem to be in touch with a bunch of beggars. that might be their thought. But it's not just one more thing, that I happen to like this and you happen to like that. We all want what religion gives us, or what spirituality gives us. We all want it, and because we want it, though most of us don't know it, therefore it really is a right and noble thing to try to help people to realize what they themselves want. When we discuss the idea of inspiring other people spiritually, then we need to realize that the inspiration has to really come from them. We have to be not telling them, but rather drawing from them the recognition that this is what they want. And if they don't want it, this is the next thing to realize, that people will get as much as they are ready for, and no more. So you can't give them something that has no relation to what they've already experienced. Some people will take a long time. There was one brother of Dhyamata in Self-Realization Fellowship, the youngest brother, who lived at Mount Washington because the sisters were there and the older brother was there and the mother was there. And yet he wasn't really in tune with the path. And Yogananda tried to bring him onto the path. But any time he would scold him for doing something that he could do better, this boy, instead of taking the scolding and trying to gain from it, he'd turn to his mother. He said, "Mommy, he's scolding me." And he never really understood. Finally, when he was about 13, Yogananda gave him a model airplane. And from then on, he just took off. That's all he wanted in life. And he entered the airplane industry, and his whole life was dedicated to... Well, what can you do with somebody like that? In the presence of a master, he still couldn't understand what it was really all about. People are going to follow their own karma. They will be able to recognize what they've actually experienced. And you yourself have doubtless had the experience that you heard something, let's say a teaching, and it meant something to you. But then a few years later you heard the same teaching and you say, "Wow, I never understood it that way." Isn't it so? It's not that you've become more intelligent, it's that you've become more experienced. You've gained an experience that has enabled you to recognize. And the truth is that nobody can really learn, or let's put it a different way. You can't teach. They can learn, but you can't teach them. You can only help them to recognize. That's teaching. If you can put it in such a way that they can see their own experience in it, and then from that experience go further, then you're a good teacher. So if you want to inspire spirituality in others, the first thing is to understand why you should do it. The sort of rules of the game are that because it's the best thing for everybody, and not just because you're trying to settle some doubt of your own. You have to realize again that we have a long time to get there, we have eternity to make it, and you shouldn't try to force growth on anybody. Offer them that which will help them to open up, and let them decide from there on how far they want to take it. The best way to inspire spirituality in others is to be centered in their needs, not your own. And what I've seen in most cases when people are talking about what they believe on the religious path is that they're centered in their own. And they're constantly talking about what they believe and what they know and what they've read, and it doesn't mean anything to you. I've had this experience, so I know what I'm talking about. I did it in all the wrong ways possible. When I first came on the path, my allowance was $12.50 a month. I think it was $15 a month. And out of that $15, I would buy autobiographies and send them to relatives and friends. And a typical example was one friend that I met about 30 years later, and I asked her if she'd enjoyed the book. What book? I suppose she received it, but she didn't know that she'd received it. I'm sure she never read it. And others of my relatives and friends and so on just felt put upon that I would try to interest them in something that they weren't interested in. I would have done much better had I said much, much less. I remember writing a letter to my parents and talking about the spiritual eye. Can you imagine such The argument was, I'm embarrassed to admit, I know it exists because I've seen it. That seemed like a clincher to me. But it didn't work. What I learned gradually was to tone my enthusiasm down and try to listen to where they are. I had to write my family off totally, but I've had a lot of success since then with everyone else. They were the sort of cannon fodder, or whatever you might say. Bit by bit, I've discovered that the way to really win people is not to wear your beliefs on your sleeve. One time, years ago, many of you know Ramananda, and I'll give you this example because I think it's worth remembering. He came onto the path because, at least it's the way he told me, because he had heard my voice on a recording, the recordings that I made in 1960 with SRF. And he was inspired by the voice, and so he got interested in the teachings. And then when he heard that I wasn't in the work, he felt very badly. And he prayed to Master, and he said Master reassured him that I was in his hands and not to worry about me, and so he felt good. And he wrote me a letter. He wasn't in the monastery yet. He was living in New York. He was the center leader there. So he wrote me a letter, and he wanted to help me in any way that he could. Well, I had just written a few of my songs, and I had put them on a tape, and so he wanted to buy a tape. This was mainly to help me. Well, the tape, I didn't have anybody in SRF that I could send it to. In fact, I'd been told not to contact anybody in the organization ever again, and this was their way of sort of keeping me outside. But I did have a lot of family, friends, and people like that. They were the main people I knew at that time. So I wrote a little piece about this and a little biography about me that would be something they could handle. And I said that I was the student of a great teacher from India, Paramhansa Yogananda. I didn't want to say more because I didn't think it would serve any purpose. Well, Ramananda got the tape, and he saw this blurb, and he said, you said a great teacher from India. You didn't even call him an avatar. You didn't say he was a great master. You didn't... he got so furious. He took the tape and with scissors cut it into thousands of pieces and hurled it into the wastebasket. Well, I said, listen, when you've brought as many people to the path as I have, maybe you'll have something to tell me. But that may have been not a very polite reply, but honestly, when people talk that way, they don't win people. If you're going to you have to think where people come from. That's really what it was all about. We had somebody at the church when I was in charge of the church in Hollywood, the SRF church there. Somebody on the committee it was her job that I gave her to meet people who were new and answer their questions if they had any, and so on. And so somebody said, well, what does Paramhansa mean? And she said, well, it means swan. Well, why swan? Oh, well, a swan is able to separate milk from water. Oh, huh? So what kind of an answer is that? You can't afford to take these shortcuts. You've got to think, what are these people's needs? And sometimes if they ask a question like that, you realize that this is going to be a detour for them. Right? It's better to bring them back to what they're really there for. But always try to consider where they're coming from and what their particular interests are. If you talk in that way, you'll find that you can help them the most. There's another aspect to it too that I want to get into later, and that is that it isn't by talking that you do the most. It's by your vibrations. I've often thought of that story of the first sermon that Buddha gave. I've told you the story. He'd been going through very severe ascetical practices, and he realized that this wasn't the way to go. So he left those, and he went into deep meditation, and then he realized God. And later he was sitting, after his enlightenment, sitting, I believe, on a rock in Sarnath outside Benares. And these three men, I guess he was walking, I'm not sure, walking I think. These three men saw him from a distance. And their first thought was, oh, this fallen soul, he's left our practices, we mustn't even see him. Even the sight of him might be a disturbing influence to us. And so they turned around as if to walk away when they thought, well, the way he was either sitting or walking, whatever it was, had something in it of command and peace, depth. And they, instead of running away, they came to him and asked him to tell them how he was. And he did, and that was when he preached his first sermon and got his first 3 disciples. But the first sermon that he preached wasn't when he opened his mouth to speak, because he'd already preached a sermon just standing there or walking. His movement, something in his aura drew them to him. That was a sermon. That's the most important thing that you can do of all. If you are what you want to inspire in others, that and that alone is really going to work. I've seen so many people on the path just talk and talk and talk, and yet they don't inspire other people because they haven't got that meditative quality in themselves. But once you've got that meditative quality, you don't even have to try, and people feel it from you. Well, that's the most important aspect of it, and we'll come into that in greater depth later. But first of all, to try to understand this principle of reaching people with words and with ideas where they are. It depends on how much contact you have with people, but it would help very much if you could try to put yourself in other people's shoes. If your contacts are wide, if your contacts are very diverse, and if you really want to devote a lot of energy to helping people in that way, then it would help you to study their interests, study their outlook, study where they're coming from. And in the case of children, try to see where each child is. This dogma that children are just born like an empty slate, a blank slate, and you write on it what you will, is very flattering to your ego maybe, but it's not true. You can see instantly the differences between just little babies. As soon as they're born, they're themselves in some ways. And of course that comes out more and more. Just look at the fact that some of them learn to talk quickly and others learn to walk quickly, and some of them are happy and some of them are crying. There's also the dogma that little boys and little girls are just the same. It's just the matter just of how they're trained that makes them behave differently. But mothers who have tried to train them the same have admitted that they couldn't. That little boys simply did have a different outlook and little girls had another outlook. Dr. Spock put it very well when he said he discovered that little boy babies, when he bent down over them to with his little mirror on his forehead, they would reach up and grab the mirror. And little girl babies would look back, would sit back and coo and look at their reflection or look at the pretty colors or whatever it was and enjoy. In some ways it seems as if men's nature is to do and women's nature is to enjoy. And what men are attracted to in women is the fact of their enjoyment. And what women are attracted to in men is the fact of their doing that which can become enjoyable. I don't know, it's an interesting theory, and it's not one I want to get into in depth. But I do want to get into this simple statement that every one of us is different. He's different according to his own hormones, but he's much more than that. What he brings into this body from the past, that which makes him the kind of person he is not something that we can make radical changes in. We can only bend the we can bend the twig so it will grow into a tree of a different shape, but we can't make the tree. We can't make an elm tree into an oak tree. We need to see that each one of our children has his own right and necessity, his personal need to fulfill his own karma. And that might mean doing things that you would love to see them avoid. Some children are born with this hunger for spiritual truths. Others don't have it at all. And if you push too hard, you'll find that you only alienate them. It's a very interesting fact that has been often observed, that the children of ministers very often turn out to be very unspiritual. They go in the opposite direction. Why? Quite obviously, because they've had it crammed down their throats. Otherwise, being the children of ministers, I mean, look at Laurie and Jeannie. In this case, it was fine. They must have been trained right. But very often you'll find that these ministers are trying to push their beliefs on them, and yet otherwise the children of ministers ought to have a predilection. Why would they be attracted to such a couple? Because of that attunement. Yet all of us rebel if we're told that we must believe this. A cousin of mine was saying the other day that he's discovered with his children that if he and they have an argument, they won't give in at all. But he's often heard later, when they're among their peers, that they will be talking his side then. When they don't know that he's listening and they don't have to lose face, but he was able to convince them, and then they take his side. So very often you'll find that out of rebellion they may reject, but if you put it carefully and well, let it come from within. I had to work with somebody on just the two of us in one of the SRF churches, and this lady was a very well, I'm not sure what the adjective would be, but she was very much into the thought that it was her decision always. I'd been told it was our decision, but she thought it was her decision. So I found that the only way I could make a thing really happen was if I could convince her that it was her idea. And I don't know, this may not be very clean politics, but I would remind her of something she'd said a year ago, and then she'd be all for it. But if I had said that I'd said it, then I didn't tell a lie. I found some way of tying it into something she had said, but it was always... If they can feel it's their idea, they're going to be a lot more open to what you're trying to tell them. And this is just as true for children. If you're absolutely right, and it's perfectly obvious that you're right, they'll still probably not agree with you if you put it in such a way as to make them look wrong. So you have to put it in such a way as to make them think, yes, this is my idea. A very good technique that way, if you want to think in terms of techniques, and we're trying to bring it to a deeper level than techniques, but still techniques are a part of living. You may be very sincere in your desire to put food in your mouth, but to have the technique of how to do it helps. When I go to a Chinese restaurant, I don't have the technique. All I have is the sincerity. So the technique in this case is to get them to say yes from the start. You'll find it's a very interesting bit of human psychology. This is one that was pointed out by Dale Carnegie in his book on how to win friends and influence people, which in the context of present society sounds like a power play, but his book wasn't written in that way. It's a very excellent book, really. And it was not influencing them against their will, but rather just winning them in the same way that we're talking here. And he said that if you say something, pose a challenge to people in such a way that they will automatically say no, which is a very common way of presenting something, then they're committed to saying no. And it'll take a lot more before they will finally come around to saying yes. That's why I stopped wearing robes when I gave lectures, except on Sundays or ceremonies or things like that. Even then I don't very often, except for Korea, because I found that what I was trying to teach people was to spiritualize their own lives, where they are right now. But the message they got when they saw me coming out with a robe, this is why Master didn't wear robes except when he was talking in church. He wore just ordinary clothes. But what the message they got was, if you want to come onto the spiritual path and practice Kriya Yoga, then you've first of all got to put on a robe. And secondly, probably go off to a cave in the Himalayas. So it was a false message, which I would have to spend half my talk trying to reassure them that wasn't what I meant. Why say it in the first place? I didn't say it, but I seemed to say it. You will find that if you can put it in such a way that there is agreement, and yet it has to be real agreement, it has to be sincere. It can't be that you're saying something in order to con them into something else. You've got to find some ground where you really are in agreement. Then you'll find that from there they'll first of all be saying yes automatically. They'll be backing up that first thing, and it'll take a lot less effort to draw them further and further into what you're trying to teach them. I've had a lot of success with that. It has its disadvantages, of course, that if you try too hard to put yourself in their shoes and see what their needs are and what their interests are, you may lose touch with your own realities and what you have to share with them. You'll have to always make this the bottom line, that what you say has to come from your realities. If you can't, then you can't be sincere in talking to them. It's got to be something you can feel from your heart, from your experience. It's always got to be from your center, not becoming lost in their center. This is what I've seen in teaching yoga in many parts of the West, that people would in their effort to convince people of the merits of what they're trying to do, they'll practically sell yoga out. They'll be sort of like the salesman in the store. Oh, you want a green suit? Come over here under the green light. So you want this from yoga? Okay, but there, you can go too far that way, and then you don't win them back. You've just gone into their camp. You've always got to understand that you're trying to convince them from something deep that you've experienced yourself, and to draw them to that in their own selves. And if you find that you can't do that, then it's worthless to try to talk. There's no point in trying to convince them of the merits of yoga. This is what many beginners do. I've seen many a discussion where they will talk, let's say visiting somebody's home or whatever it might be, and they will talk at great length about what a good thing yoga is in an abstract form. And when it's all over, it has absolutely no more meaning than the latest baseball scores, probably less, because at least there's sometimes some commitment in the baseball scores. The effort to tell people, to talk to people on this level, it isn't finally convincing. I remember when I was talking, again, I've told a number of you this before, when I was talking at Haverford College. You were there, Kalyani, weren't you, that time? You remember? That was quite a... They expected not very many people. They had to move it to another hall, didn't they? And that hall was unfortunately one that they couldn't keep too long because there was some other thing happening, a movie being shown at 10 o'clock or something. So that hall we finally had to leave, but people were so insistent on asking questions that we all moved over to another hall, and they were still asking questions till at 12:30 when I finally said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm tired. And so I went home, but they could have kept me there all night asking questions. They were very interested. But out of all those people, only one has come back. And I don't know how many people's hearts I touched, because it was on a mental level. They were just asking questions in the abstract. What you want to do, if you really want to inspire people, is bring it down to what their needs are. Otherwise, it's fun, no doubt. Parrying and thrusting, it's sort of like a fencing match. that they come up with this great challenge and you say, no, wrong. But when it's finally over, are they changed? No. They just go home to lick their wounds and come back again another day with renewed vigor. If you can really catch them where their needs are, that you can't do on just a mental level. You have to feel deeply. And you have to wait for the right moment. Because many times people aren't open. It's sort of like going to a high diver, and just as he's about to dive, you ask him some serious question. I remember when I was in Romania, growing up in Romania, I was probably 5 years old, and my dad was coming down the slopes, and he wasn't much of a skier, so he was like this, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy!" And he tried to stop and fell all over himself, and there was this jumble of sticks and so on, and finally a head emerged. And he, "What is it, son? What is it?" "Daddy, why are the church bells ringing?" He could have slain me at that point, I think. You have to choose your moments to say what it is you have to say. But if you are working with people, just wait. Wait until there is an opening in their hearts. Wait until they have gone through some experience that will deepen their outlook. Try to touch them, in any case, on a deeper than mental level. If it's all just talking and philosophizing, you really won't get it. You won't get anywhere. I don't think I've ever won anybody on that level. I've had lots of talks. I'm good at argument, discussion. I'm good at discussion. I'm good at making my points. I'm good at beating down the other person's points. And I never lose at this sort of thing. Have I ever won? I don't think so. I don't think it ever works. What I've found really works is if I can touch their hearts. If I can share with them the joy that I feel. Again, remember that you're not going to be able to do an equal amount for everybody. Just like that boy that finally got turned on when he got a model airplane. You can put a great deal of energy into somebody, and it will be a bottomless pit. Save your energy for those people who are most ready. The best thing to do is to always feel in your heart, where are they coming from? How open are they? How aware are they? I know I have a relative who, even in the cradle, I said, he's going to be a great man someday. There was something in his eyes that made me feel that. And I've always been waiting for him to come onto the path. And he's put out a few feelers every now and then, but I'm not going to push it at all. If he opens more, then I'll open more. But I'm going to let him come this way, because I think that's the best way to help him. Otherwise, he's intelligent enough to see through my ploy and say, wait a minute, I don't want anybody telling me what to do. So I just have to sort of hold back and wait for that right moment. But the times that I have, that I'm with him, I try to give him a certain kind of consciousness that may help him. That's the best thing of all. You will find that in any given group of people, there will be some people who are more receptive than others. Concentrate more on them. This is something that is contrary to the whole American dogma, you might call it, that you try to help the worst students, not the best. We try to have an egalitarian society to prove a dogma that's totally false in the first place, which is that everybody is born equal. We aren't born equal. There are no two people alike. We all are born equal as children of God. We're all born equal in our right to achieve our own natural heights. But to say that everybody is equally talented, equally intelligent, equally strong, equally energetic, is ridiculous. Every one of us is different. This whole egalitarian idea of not giving any energy to the best and trying to concentrate on the lowest and bring everybody up to a sort of dull average doesn't work. It would be far better, and this is the way I've made it work here at Ananda. When in the early years we had people of various types that were, some of them very, very in tune with what I was trying to do here. I didn't try to spend any time, what to speak of some time, any time at all, to convert them. I concentrated on those who really were in tune with it, concentrated on those who were strong in what we were trying to accomplish. And what I found was that created a nucleus, and that nucleus gained strength. And as it gained strength, it created its own magnetism that drew other people in. Here we have then two philosophies. I'm committed to this second one. The first one is help everybody and hope that somebody gets the message. The other one is help those who are ready, help those who are open, and they will create a strong enough magnet to draw others who were less ready, and they will create a stronger magnet which will draw others that were still less ready. And finally you'll have such a magnet that the total bores and bullies will at least not be able to be bores and bullies, because they'll realize it's not possible. They may not become spiritual, but at least their materialism and ego will be contained. Everything is, in the last analysis, magnetism. When you have a strong enough magnet, people are drawn in. Master used to say about Mount Washington that it's like a great wheel turning, and some people being in tune get drawn into the center. Other people not being in tune get thrown off. And Ananda's like that too. It's a giant magnet. Those who are in tune with it get drawn into the center, and those who aren't gradually work their way to the outside and get spun off. This is the only way that you can make anything happen in your family, in your circle of friends, in your school, in your children. Concentrate on those who have the potential for being leaders. Concentrate on those who have the potential for helping to awaken this in others. Realize there isn't that much you can do alone, but if you can inspire a group, whenever I see somebody who has that potential, I try to draw them in. But I've seen again and again that when people are drawn in with the right understanding, part of that right understanding is that it's not personality. It is spirit first. That when we're in tune with the spirit and we try to share with people that magnetism, that's the best thing you can do for them. If you want to help people, the talking that you do with them, the sharing that you have on a human level, this isn't the real thing. It's almost sort of like an excuse to enable the other to happen. But if you win people, for example, because they like you, that's not enough. Supposing you die, what's going to happen to them then? What they've got to learn is to like themselves. You don't want to convert them to a teaching. You don't want to convert them to you or to yourself. You want to convert them to a feeling that they get inside themselves, that they realize is an aspect of themselves that they like. If you can awaken in them that longing for joy, if you can give them a taste of something and help them to see that it's not from you, but it's in them, the more you can impersonalize the help that you extend to them, the stronger that help's going to be. It's a very, very important thing to see yourself as just an instrument for the divine. I found that when I'm trying to help somebody, and Master once said, I always know when God wants me to save somebody, and then I show that interest. And to some extent, I have to say I've felt that too. That I feel in my heart that I'm supposed to give energy to this particular person or that particular person. And if I give energy, then I find that if that person is open to that energy and receives it, that they're changed. And yet it isn't I who do it. What I do is, I don't think, oh, I want to help this person. I don't feel that way. I try to tune myself to God and say, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? How can I help? Again and again, what I've been amazed to find, because it's sort of an exploratory process for me too. It's not something that I necessarily do deliberately, and the less I do it deliberately, the better it seems to work. I just inwardly ask God, use me. Tell me what to say. Tell me whom to say it to. Tell me how to reach that person on that level which will be most helpful. And if I do it in that way, then what I find is that it's different for each person, according to who that person is, according to what his needs are. And it may be something very different from what I would do for myself. What you need to do is put yourself so much in the other person's shoes that you feel, in a sense, you are that person. Master said that at night I sometimes go into the body of another person and try to help him from within by identifying myself with him. And he says sometimes I go so deeply into that person that when I wake up in the morning I think I am that person. He said it can be a very terrible experience. But, well, you can imagine coming down from where he is to our level. But yet, that identifying with the other person from a higher level, but really getting into him and feeling him. Don't judge people. Try to see where they're coming from. Everyone has something to work on. Everyone has something that he's trying to learn. Don't make value judgments if you're trying to help people. Try to just see what their strengths are and then work with those strengths. Work with their strengths, not their weaknesses. Just as when you work with a group, it's best to try to work with those who are more receptive. So also, in those people that you try to help, try to work with those aspects of their nature that are most receptive. Realize that everybody will have some aspect that's closed, and don't worry about it. Just accept this is what people are, and then look for that opening that you'll be able to get through. Sometimes it takes a long time. It may take years even with some people who are close to you. But bit by bit you'll see that you can find the right thing to say, and suddenly their whole lives are changed. Another thing that helps, it helps very much to make it very clear that you're really only thinking of their welfare and that you're not attached. A sense of humor is very helpful in that. Because if you can laugh about it, then they realize that you're not attached, you're not trying to force it. If you can just be pleasant about it, and if they close the door, fine, let the door be closed. It's important to think that it's for their welfare, and yet not to feel that they owe you anything because you've thought of their welfare. If you really want it for their welfare, then you have to accept that they don't owe you anything. They don't owe it to you to accept a word that you say. You really are doing it for yourself. You're doing it because you want to serve God. If you talk to them in that way, then they will be more receptive. Being is the most important thing of all. Obviously, there are other things you can do. Before I get into that, I just thought of it. Sharing books with them, sharing ideas. Look for those things that are likely to be meaningful, but do it in a light way until they become more serious, and then you can be more serious. If you adjust yourself to their reality, then adjust on all levels. That is to say, that accept their lack of commitment and come on that level. When that commitment grows, then you can come in more seriously. That's what we do with our channels. They're fun for the people who want to think of them as fun, but they're a much deeper commitment for those who want to go deeper. And each one is free to take it in his own way. There was a lady that I used to know, and she always felt that it was her Christian duty to say something that would uplift and edify. And it became sort of boring. At every party, here you are telling a good joke, and she makes an edifying statement. She would have been far better if she'd just been able to relax and enjoy the fun, and then at the right moment she could have said something which would linger. Be with them where they are. Don't constantly be shoving literature at them, for example. think not in terms of that kind of book which has helped you, but what will help them. I know there was a talk I gave in New Delhi, and some man in the group there, during the talk, asked a question, and I wanted to give him the advice that it would help him to spend his weekends, at least occasionally, in an ashram where he could get the influence of other people. And naturally, I would have thought, well, we have an ashram here, why don't you come to that? But I was asking God for guidance, and I found myself saying, there's an Aurobindo ashram here in New Delhi, why don't you go to that? And later he came up to me and said, how do you know I'm a member of their society? I didn't know it, but I just felt that's where he belonged. We want to realize that we're not trying to bring people to our path and our teaching. If we're really trying to convert them to themselves, to their own higher self, then that's enough. We don't have to bring them into a particular definition of of the teaching. Usually, naturally, it's my own joy in these teachings would lead me to tell people about them. Still, if I want to inspire them to know God, then naturally what I want to do is help them to find God in their way. And there are many times when I've told people, although certainly the most times I've told them about my path, but many times when I felt, no, this is their way or that's their way, and I've pointed them in directions of other books, other teachers, and so on, because I felt right about it for them. If you will do whatever it is that you do in your efforts to help people, do it in an intuitive way. Do it in the sense of sharing with God and not just with a person. Asking God to guide you as to what you should say and do. You will be amazed to find how He really comes in and helps you. You don't know why you're saying something, but it works. If you find that what you have to say doesn't work, pull back. Don't try to strike out in all directions in the hope of finding something that works. Be sensitive. It's sort of like threading a needle. You can't jam the thread into the eye of the needle. If it misses even a little bit, you have to pull back and bring it to a point again, and then very sensitively go in. I've often found it necessary to totally avoid the discussion because the vibrations weren't right. Maybe, I remember a conversation where I was trying to talk in a certain way, and I was trying to develop a theme in a very subtle way, and then somebody else from Ananda stepped in with some idea of her own, and came on very strong in that way. And I backed off because I saw that the vibrations had become fuzzy, and it would be impossible for me to really tune into his mind as long as her mind was so actively going. But she wasn't tuning into his mind. She was talking about what some wonderful thing she'd found that worked. But it wasn't in tune with where he was coming from. When the vibrations don't work, pull back. If it isn't God's will that you talk at this time, and if there is no other time to talk, because you'll never see each other again, let it be. When it's that person's time, when it's karmically right for him to receive the answers he's fishing for, they will be given to him. It's not something to get preoccupied by. It doesn't help if you get too tense and worried, and, oh, I've got to say the right thing, and this is the moment I owe it to him. No. Let it happen as God wills. He will open up the door. I found many times, in conversations with strangers when I'm just talking, and they will want me to talk. They'll be pressing me with questions, and I just won't answer. Or I'll answer in a very offhand way, because I see that they're not coming from the right place. And any answer I give isn't going to help them. And what will remain is the thought that, well, I asked that question, I got the answer, and so I don't need to ask it again. And so they'll put it in a drawer and never look at it again. I'd rather make that remain almost a sort of a raw wound. Gee, I asked and I never got an answer. Because then they'll want it to be healed when the time is sincere enough, when they are sincere enough, they will really, you have to feel it. I put it this way, and it's hard to understand perhaps what I'm saying, but when you feel it inside, you know this is the time to talk and this is the time not to talk. Sometimes the time to talk is, it wouldn't look like it if you saw it in writing on a page, the whole dialogue. You'll think, well, gee, this person didn't say anything. What's he feeding any thought in there for? And here you see, look, he's asking all these questions and you haven't answered him at all. But you feel the vibration, and that's the most important aspect of it of all. Get in tune with the inner being that they have, and then get in tune with where you are, and be completely natural. I think that's a very important thing to reassure people, because they have the idea that when you get on the spiritual path, the very least that happens is that you become a fanatic. And I know this one lady, her brother and sister-in-law came to visit her and said, you shouldn't be a fanatic. She was living in the ashram and shouldn't be a fanatic. And she said, what do you mean fanatic? What are you, just an archaeologist working with bones? And what kind of a central life have you got? Well, people don't see that when they're committed to what they're doing. They think that that's fine. You're a pillar of society. But what are you doing out here? They don't realize that everywhere you are is a center. So don't let them have that thought that comes so naturally to the worldly person, that because you're not doing what they're doing, therefore there's something strange about you and you're not normal. Just be normal, be yourself. And that, I think, will help them more than anything else. I found again and again that if I can be peaceful in my heart, that people will be changed. It was a very interesting experience. When I went to Reno, I had a lecture to give at the Church of Religious Science there. And the minister said, weren't you in Parks, Arizona, back in 1963? And I said, yes. He said, I thought you must be. And it was in November or December. And he said, then he told me the story. He said, do you remember that fundamentalist minister who came to visit where you were staying? It was an Indian camp. And yes, I did remember. Well, he said, I was that minister. He said it was a very interesting experience because I was being transferred to another church in Albuquerque from Southern California. And in the car ride, my wife, my mother, and 2 children, I think it was, were all riding, and all the way to Parks, Arizona, we were arguing and fighting. And then we met you, and we talked about different things. You didn't really tell us anything much about what you did, but we understood it was something to do with yoga. And then after a night there, we went on to Albuquerque. And I realized halfway to Albuquerque that we hadn't had an argument, that we were feeling completely peaceful. And we realized that it was the influence of meeting you that did that. And then I was thinking, how is it possible? Here I am, a minister of the gospel of peace, talking peace and believing in it, and yet somehow I can't do it. And here's this heathen practicing things that are supposed to be all wrong, and yet he's manifesting what I'm talking about. And it got him so confused that after a while he left the church and began studying and finally became a minister in the Church of Religious Science. But very interesting how I hadn't made any effort to convert him, but I had made an effort to share my peace with him. I felt he was hungering for it. If we can do that for people, that will do more good for them than anything else. Many children have had this experience of seeing their parents tell them to do one thing, but the parents themselves never do it. Like telling them to go to Sunday school, but the parents don't go to church. Do as I say, don't do as I do. Children can't respect that. No one can respect that. But if we, in our hearts, feel the peace and the joy, and then share that joy with the children that we're training. The teachers, I used to find this when I gave lectures. I've often said I don't prepare a talk, but I do try to prepare myself. If the teachers would try to, before going into the classroom, prepare themselves. Another thing in the way of prayer is to, when I've talked with groups, I've prayed, God, show me what these people need. I would do that before public lectures, and I found that I was able to reach each audience in a different way. But the answer to that prayer came out of my desire to be inspired in that way. If you, in teaching children, in meeting others, if you keep a little prayerful place inside yourself and say, God, show me, what I've found is that if I talk too quickly out of the desire to say something and hope that something good will come in the very process of blurting it all out, I very often will say the wrong thing. Now I try to feel it first, and then from that feeling project it. Concentration. Another very important aspect of it is to speak the truth. If you have the mental habit, it's so easy to tell a lie. Many things you could say that nobody would catch you in. You could just casually say, I went to San Francisco yesterday, and you didn't go, but nobody would know where you went, so it didn't matter. Many people who get into the habit of telling lies find that it's very easy. Of course, they trip themselves up frequently, but if they're clever enough at it, you don't find out very soon. And so they go on doing it. It becomes a habit. What happens finally is that their own words lose the power of conviction, and they lose the power to really make things happen. Your words have power. And if you speak that which you mean, if you say that which you really feel, and say it with concentration, then you'll find that sometimes a single word will change people. When I was separated from SRF and was living with my parents for a while, none of their friends were on the spiritual path. Some of them went to church, but there was no effort to meditate or seek God or that which we define as being on the spiritual path, knowing, of course, full well that everyone is on the spiritual path in a broader sense. But I found that they would tell Mother that Dawn, as they called me, has something. I would be so surprised because I'd sit on the outside of their conversations, hardly entering into them, but they'd feel something there. If you can have that consciousness in your heart of God's presence, that you will be projecting even if you aren't trying. I wasn't trying to project it to them. I didn't feel that there was anything particularly to do, and yet still they felt something. If you will be in tune with God, He will do that which He wills to do through them and through you. It reminds me of that saint in India, Sri Rama Yogi. I asked him why he didn't talk more to the public, why he didn't have many disciples and do a great work. He had nobody. He had just a couple of people there, an uncle and one or two disciples. He said, God has done that which He wishes to do through this body. And just a few months later he died. He never had a public work. It wasn't his particular path. Remember, God will play in different ways through each one. And your role may not be to go out and convert the masses and interest large crowds. Your way may be indeed to just inspire people whom you never meet again and you don't know that you did help them. But it's a wonderful feeling over a period of years to find people coming to you from this little experience with you and that little experience with you whom you don't even remember touching. You don't remember what you talked about. And yet something in your presence, in what you said, in what happened, something there lingered with them. And years later you meet them and they say, that was a turning point in my life. Or I've always remembered, and then they start telling you something. And you realize that, well, I am doing some good after all. Every one of you has had that experience, I'm sure of it. Because you couldn't be on the path and not have it. Your lives will touch others the more you are on the path yourself. How to inspire it, therefore, in others? Obviously, the most important thing is to be inspired yourself. If you have this magnetism, remember the principle of the magnet. When you have an unmagnetized bar of metal next to one that is magnetized, the unmagnetized bar becomes a magnet too. And so in the presence of people who have that consciousness, you yourself become changed. The person who's in that contact becomes changed. Now, the most important aspect of what I wanted to talk about today is not only that the real way to change people is to be in tune and to try to change them from this level of inner attunement with God, but also to realize how very much you have that power right now. People tend to think, because they can't see it, they can't put their hands on it and grasp it, they tend to think that, well, if I'm really going to do any good, I've got to learn how to be more polished in my speech. I've got to learn a few good anecdotes, like this coach in high school who was very much of a crowd pleaser, and somebody found his files. In his files there was a whole big section of cards, jokes to tell the boys, and you make a big system of it. It may help, but the fact is, every one of you, the more you meditate, the more you really have the ability, much more than you realize, to touch the lives of others, and in ways that you don't realize. This is our strength. This is what I've been trying to tell people here at Ananda, that as Bill, when he got up to talk about the job he's doing at Earthsong, and admitting, quite frankly, one might almost say blatantly, that he didn't know what books were, and profit and loss statements. When you're running a store, this seems like fairly basic knowledge, doesn't it? But what he was doing was exemplifying this single thing that I've talked about for a long time, that our strength here at Ananda is who we are, what we are. And that if you put out that kind of energy, the books may never balance, but people are going to want to come to the store, and they're not going to want to come to the store because your books balance. They're going to come because they like you. Now, how are they going to like you? If you have what they want. And what do they want? Somehow all of them want the same thing, even though they define it in different ways. You can come on and be a personality kind of guy, and everybody will sort of clap hands, here comes Charlie attitude. But that's not what we're talking about. If you come to them with that feeling of inner strength and joy, if you come to them making them feel that you have peace, everybody wants peace. Not as a put-up job, just be absolutely sincere. You don't have to talk about things that you haven't experienced. You can't tell people, I know there's a God, if they say they're atheists. How do you know there's a God unless you've seen him? But you can talk about things that you do know. Talk about things that you have experienced. And more than that, not what you say, but how you say it. Try to draw them. Put out a magnetism to attract them to what you know is good for them, rather than coming up with all the arguments. Sometimes I found that by deliberately not answering a question, I draw them much more than if I answer it, because perhaps it's a question that is superficial. And if I answer that, then we get into a sidetrack. Somebody says, well, why did God make the universe? How are you going to answer a question like that anyway? Sometimes it's better to bring them back to the mess they're in and what they're going to do about it. Feel your way in that way, but realize that in the last analysis, although it's good, in fact, absolutely essential to be humble, this is not a contradiction of humility, to realize that you are the one that will help them. I mean who you are and what you are. That if they like you, if they're attracted to what you've got, if they feel that this man has what I want, that will say more than books that you might give them. You have to be the channel for it. So be loving to them, be open to them, be respectful to them, respectful of where they are, where they're coming from. We must realize that we do have something important. I used to have this idea when I was talking that my whole idea was just to turn people to Master and he would do it all. I found that it didn't happen that way. If they didn't like me, they wouldn't like him. If they did like me, they would like him. So then I had to be the channel. Then I thought, all right, I'll convert them to him by making them, I don't want to make people like me, I couldn't care less that way, but to help them to be attracted to what I'm representing, that's essential. And so in that way I'd try to draw them and turn them over to Master, and then I'd think, well, that's that. I'd sort of turn them over and leave them in his hands and walk away. I did, in fact. But I found it didn't work. I found that they still needed to have help, further guidance, and I realized that there's a responsibility that you assume when you help other people. A responsibility to continue to be that channel for them until they reach the point where they can have that attunement more deeply in themselves. You have something. You can't be on the path and not have something real. And yet, you all are attracted here, in a sense, because of me and who I am, and that means my faults as well as my strengths. And my fault has been, in a sense, always to try to take a back seat and not accept that I'm able to do anything at all, and always try to point to Master and say, he's doing it all, to the point of not really realizing the power that I have, that I know is there, that I can feel flowing through me, to touch people's lives and touch their souls. And when I've tried to touch people on that level, I find I help them in a way that's far greater than any other way that I can do it. You can, in whatever contact is there, touch people's souls if you really pray and try to reach them on that level. Your magnetism will help them. But I attract people who tend to put themselves down, because I've always had this problem of doubt, self-doubt, and so on, and it never shows to anybody, but it's a fact. And I always used to think, well, I'm not really worthy, and I'm not really, I'm the worst of all of Master's disciples, and so on. And I didn't put myself down, I merely accepted it calmly as a fact. But what I realized that it wasn't a fact. Or if a fact, it just didn't matter, because I still had something. And if they had more, fine. But that didn't mean I had nothing. And so I find that I attract a lot of people who are always sort of insecure about what they have to share with people. And yet, as I look at each one of you, I see such radiation in your faces, such radiance, I mean, and yet I see this same tendency to think that, well, I want to help people, and what can I do? Not realizing that who you are is what you can help people with. And so there's the thought, oh, we've got to do this, we've got to build this business, and we've got to get that project going, and so on, and not realize the extent to which simply being yourself is going to inspire. Now, I don't want to feed your egos, but to work with your strengths is to be a channel in the best way possible for God. The more you allow Him to work through you in the highest way, the more you yourself become godly. And so, those people who are on the path, not out of lack of humility, but really out of humility, you're not more humble for saying, I can't do anything if you can. You're more humble for saying, well, God is the doer and He can do anything. We get sort of twisted, like somebody compliments you on the beautiful sweater that you're wearing, and you say, oh, really, it's nothing. What you're doing is returning, he compliments you and you insult him in return. That's not very gracious. We have to realize that to act in the right way, to accept the right responsibility, to know that, for example, it's not being humble to say it's not a pretty sweater. Thank you, I appreciate it. You wouldn't have bought the stupid thing if it weren't pretty. So be sincere. And yet, realize that as you can give, that it really isn't yours to give anyway, it is God's. The more you can act in that way and share his joy, not your joy, the more you will find that you really do touch people's lives. You can inspire spirituality in others to the extent that you see it in yourself.